you ever meet a woman who doesn't need the noise, who walks in silent, sits alone, and still feels like the loudest energy in the room? That's not loneliness you're seeing. That's power. That's focus. That's a woman who doesn't chase attention because she's too busy chasing peace. And let me tell you something, when a woman gets good at being alone, she becomes one of the most dangerous forces you'll ever come across. Why? Because nobody controls her. Not fear, not approval, not anyone. You see, when a woman spends time alone, consistently, intentionally, something starts to shift. At first, it's uncomfortable. The silence feels loud, the space feels empty. There's no one to text, no one to distract her, no one giving her a sense of who she's supposed to be. But that's the point. In that silence, she begins to strip away the layers she's worn just to belong, the version of her who smiled to avoid conflict, the version of her who tolerated nonsense just to feel loved, the version of her who kept shrinking herself so someone else could feel big. All of that starts falling off when she's alone. Because solitude doesn't lie. It shows you who you really are when no one's watching, when no one's affirming, when no one's influencing. And for most people, that's terrifying. But for her, she leaned into it. She stopped running from herself. And in doing that, she built something most people never touch in their entire lives, an unshakable core. Not a persona, not an identity made up of filters, applause, or approval. I'm talking about her essence, her truth. The version of her that doesn't need to be seen to feel seen. She starts waking up differently. She doesn't need to scroll first thing in the morning just to feel connected. She doesn't need to post every moment just to feel alive. She's not chasing presence anymore. She is present. Because when you know who you are, you stop asking the world to remind you. That's what makes her dangerous. You can't manipulate a woman like that. You can't shame her because she's already accepted the parts of her story that most people try to hide. You can't pressure her because she's no longer performing. You can't scare her with solitude because that's exactly where she found her power. She no longer walks into a room wondering if she's enough. She already knows. She walks in whole, and wholeness doesn't compete. Wholeness doesn't beg. Wholeness doesn't shrink itself to make other people feel more comfortable. That's the shift. That's the energy that makes people stop and notice. Even if she says nothing, it's in her stillness. It's in her calm. It's in the way she doesn't reach for attention because she's not starving for it. That's how you know she's done the work, the deep work, the quiet work, the work no one applauds you for but changes everything about how you move. And let's be real, people don't always like that. A woman who's centered makes insecure people uncomfortable because they can't predict her. They can't control her. She's not desperate to fit in, so she becomes a mirror for everyone who still is. She reminds people of what they've avoided in themselves. But she's not shaken by that. Why would she be? She didn't build her identity on their opinions. She built it in solitude, in moments no one saw, in choices no one applauded. And that kind of foundation, you can't fake it. You can't copy it. You can only earn it. And she did. So now, when life gets chaotic, she's not easily moved. When someone disrespects her, she doesn't crumble. She calmly steps away. When she's misunderstood, she doesn't over-explain. When she's alone, she's not lonely. She's aligned. That's the woman who becomes dangerous. Not because she's out to destroy anyone, but because nothing can destroy her. What makes a woman truly powerful isn't how loud she is. It's how still she can be in the middle of chaos. And when a woman spends enough time alone, she learns something most people never figure out: how to sit with her emotions without letting them run the show. That's what emotional discipline looks like. It's not that she doesn't feel, it's that she feels deeply, fully, and still chooses her response over her reaction. She's not triggered by every little thing. She doesn't explode when she's hurt or lash out when she's misunderstood. She pauses, she breathes, she thinks, and then she moves with clarity. See, solitude teaches that. When you're constantly surrounded by people, it's easy to blame the noise for your emotions. But when you're alone, it's just you, your thoughts, your patterns, your emotions, and there's no one else to pin them on. That's when you start learning how to manage them, not avoid them. She stopped running from her anger and started asking why it shows up. She stopped numbing her sadness and started listening to what it was trying to say. She stopped letting anxiety write the script and started choosing peace on purpose. That kind of self-awareness only comes from being willing to sit still long enough to actually hear yourself. And once she learned that, once she realized she could feel pain without being defined by it, her power changed. You couldn't bait her into arguments anymore. You couldn't use guilt to make her stay. You couldn't provoke her and expect the old reaction. Because now she's not moved by emotion, she moves through emotion. That makes her dangerous, not because she's cold, but because she's composed. And that kind of composure, it's not weakness, it's strength with restraint. It's knowing you could break someone with your words, but choosing not to. It's knowing you could snap back, but realizing it's not even worth your energy. You can tell she's done that work when you watch how she responds in pressure. She doesn't panic, she doesn't spiral, she observes, she assesses, she decides. And when she speaks, there's weight behind her words, not volume, not drama, but truth backed by stillness. She doesn't scream to be heard anymore. She's not looking to prove a point. She is the point. And when she walks away from something, it's not out of fear or avoidance. It's because she knows her peace is too expensive to be wasted on things that don't grow her. People underestimate emotional discipline because it's not loud. It's not flashy. It's not posted all over social media. But it's what separates a woman who survives life from a woman who commands it. Because when she's no longer ruled by her moods, she becomes intentional with her choices. And intentions shape everything. Her relationships get healthier. Her standards get clearer. Her time gets more protected. Why? Because she's not just reacting to life anymore. She's responding to it with wisdom. And that kind of wisdom only comes when you've stopped distracting yourself long enough to actually learn it. So now, when someone tries to test her, she doesn't flinch. When life throws her off balance, she finds her footing. And when others expect her to crumble under pressure, she becomes more precise, more focused, more calm. That's the kind of woman you don't mess with, not because she's aggressive, but because she doesn't need to be. Her silence speaks. Her stillness speaks. And when she decides to speak, you listen, because you know every word has already passed through fire and came out refined. There's a moment that hits different when a woman realizes she's not afraid of being alone anymore, not just physically, but emotionally. She's no longer chasing people, holding on to broken connections, or entertaining spaces that drain her. That shift, that's a turning point. Because most people operate out of fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not being chosen. But when a woman has spent enough time alone, she doesn't move out of fear anymore. She moves out of standards. And that makes her a threat to anything built on inconsistency, manipulation, or dependency. See, when she was younger, when she didn't know her worth, she tolerated a lot in the name of love or loyalty. She held on when she should have let go. She explained herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. She begged for clarity in places that only offered confusion. But time alone taught her something powerful. Peace is not negotiable, not anymore. She got tired of handing her energy to people who didn't value it. And once she saw how calm life could be without all that noise, all that chaos, all that emotional tug of war, she stopped settling for anything less. That's what makes her dangerous now. She's not the woman who clings to people out of loneliness. She's the one who can let go with grace. She's not staying in places where she has to shrink. She's not accepting the bare minimum just to say she has someone. She knows what it feels like to eat alone, sleep alone, live alone, and still feel full. She's not looking to be completed. She is complete. And that kind of self-possession, it can't be controlled. Because you can't guilt her into staying. You can't bribe her with attention. You can't confuse her with mixed signals. She's seen what silence sounds like, and now she recognizes the noise for what it is. When you no longer fear being alone, your tolerance shifts dramatically. The red flags that used to feel familiar now feel offensive. The maybe this time turns into never again. You're not hoping people change, you're watching how they act. You're not building potential in your mind, you're reading what's actually in front of you. And if it doesn't align, she walks. Not because she's bitter, not because she's heartless, but because she knows the cost of staying in places that rob her peace. And she's already paid that price too many times before. What's even more powerful is that she's not angry about it anymore. She doesn't leave with resentment, she leaves with clarity. She doesn't try to make you see her worth. She knows it now. And when a woman knows her worth, not from the compliments of others, but from the quiet hours she's spent learning herself, she becomes impossible to break. She can love you deeply and still choose herself. She can forgive you and still leave. She can care without carrying what's not hers. And that level of detachment isn't cold. It's healthy. It's wisdom. It's boundaries learned through fire. So when you see a woman who spends time alone, understand she's not isolated. She's aligned. She's not avoiding people. She's filtering them. And if you find yourself in her presence, it's because she chose you, not because she needs you. She's no longer afraid of what walks away. She's more focused on what aligns with her peace. And that kind of focus, that kind of grounded, deliberate self-respect, that's what makes her untouchable. One of the most underestimated things about a woman who spends a lot of time alone is how intentional she becomes. You start noticing it in the smallest ways, how she walks, how she talks, how she protects her time. Nothing about her is rushed. Nothing is careless. Because when you've had enough quiet in your life, when you've pulled back from the constant noise and distraction, you begin to slow down your decisions. You stop making moves just to fill the space. You start asking, does this actually serve me? Instead of, will this make me liked? A woman like that doesn't live on autopilot. She doesn't say yes just to be polite. She's not going along with the crowd just to keep the peace. She's intentional with who she lets in, what she gives her energy to, and where she places her trust. And that scares a lot of people, because most of us are used to people being easy to read, easy to control, easy to predict. But she doesn't move that way anymore. Her time alone taught her to pause, to think, to study her own patterns before blaming others for the outcomes. And now that she knows better, she chooses better, on purpose. There was a time when she used to act on impulse, when she'd get caught up in emotions, in moments, in people who looked good but didn't align with anything real. But those days are gone. She's no longer trying to be impressive. She's trying to be aligned. She doesn't just want something exciting, she wants something meaningful. And that only comes when you learn to sit still long enough to ask yourself what you truly need, not just what feels good in the moment. That kind of woman won't be moved by temporary pleasure anymore. She's looking at long-term impact. She doesn't need attention if it comes with inconsistency. She doesn't want company if it costs her peace. She's not interested in a connection that drains her more than it fills her. And the reason she can make those choices is because she's already been through the cycle of giving too much, hoping too hard, and ending up empty. Her solitude taught her to fill herself first, so now no one else gets to decide her worth by how much she's needed. She's intentional about everything. How she spends her mornings, what kind of conversations she allows, even how she reacts, because now she understands that not everything deserves one. When someone tries to provoke her, she doesn't get pulled into the mess. When an opportunity comes up, she doesn't jump just because it looks shiny. She sits with it. She reflects. And if it doesn't feel right in her gut, she walks away. No second guessing. No back and forth. Because her life isn't on auction anymore. She doesn't need to prove herself to be chosen. What's dangerous about that is you can't play her anymore. You can't sell her the dream and deliver a nightmare. She sees through things now. She's been alone long enough to hear her intuition clearly. She trusts herself more than anyone's opinion. And that makes her hard to fool, hard to manipulate, hard to keep if you're not bringing something real to the table. She's not living to react. She's living to build. That's why she moves slower, speaks less, chooses carefully. Not because she's scared, but because she finally respects the cost of her own energy. And when a woman gets to that point, she doesn't just live with intention. She becomes unstoppable with it. One of the rarest things you'll ever see is a woman who thinks for herself. Not just repeating what she's heard, not just echoing the opinions of the people around her, but someone who's actually done the internal work. Someone who's questioned, reflected, sat in silence long enough to develop her own truth. That doesn't happen by accident. That kind of mindset is built in solitude. It's built when she chooses stillness over stimulation, when she chooses clarity over noise, and when she gets comfortable not just being alone, but learning while she's alone. And when a woman gets to that place, she becomes incredibly hard to influence. You can't sell her on trends because she's not looking to fit in. You can't sway her with pressure because she's not living for approval. She's already made peace with standing alone if it means standing in truth. Most people are terrified of that, terrified of being the only one who thinks differently, of being the odd one out. But not her. She doesn't need the crowd. She doesn't crave the echo chamber. She's not afraid of silence because she's found her voice inside it. That's what makes her dangerous in the best way. You can't manipulate her with groupthink. She doesn't fold just because everyone else is clapping. She's not clapping unless it actually makes sense to her spirit. That level of independence is rare. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's quiet and grounded and secure. And that security doesn't come from being right all the time. It comes from knowing she's willing to change her mind. But only when she decides it's time. Not because someone told her to. Not because it's popular. But because it's aligned with who she's becoming. You start to notice the difference in her conversations. She's not quick to argue because she doesn't need to prove her point. She listens, really listens. But she's also discerning. She knows the difference between wisdom and noise, between someone who's speaking from experience and someone who's just repeating what they heard. She's not impressed by surface level. She's interested in depth. And if a conversation doesn't challenge her, grow her, or inspire her, she's not going to sit in it just to be polite. And that's the thing. When you've spent real time alone, when you've worked through your thoughts without distraction, you start to think deeply. You don't react to everything. You don't need to fill every moment with commentary. You become selective with your words. You learn how to hold space for tension, how to sit in uncertainty without spiraling, and how to filter what's worth your energy. That's mental independence. And that's what she walks in now. She doesn't follow just to belong. She belongs to herself first. And that shifts everything. She doesn't wear ideas like outfits, switching them up depending on the room she's in. Her beliefs are rooted. Her values are clear. Her boundaries are sharp. And because of that, she's not just hard to influence, she's hard to move off course. She's not living a reactive life. She's living a designed one. And that kind of intentionality, that level of sovereignty, it intimidates people who still rely on the crowd to feel valid. So when you come across a woman like that, one who's built her mind in solitude, one who thinks for herself, and one who doesn't need your agreement to feel grounded, you better believe she's not someone to underestimate. Because a woman who knows her own mind can't be owned by anyone else. The most powerful shift happens when a woman finally stops running from herself. And it doesn't always start loud. In fact, it usually begins in quiet, those nights when she's sitting in her own thoughts, wrestling with everything she's avoided, the pain she buried, the patterns she ignored, the wounds she covered up with distractions, with people, with business. But then she does something most people never do. She faces it, all of it. And in doing that, she becomes untouchable, not because life stops being hard, but because she stopped being afraid of the hard parts. A woman who's faced herself doesn't need to fake strength. She's lived through disappointment and sat in the discomfort. She's seen her reflection on the days she didn't recognize who she'd become. She's felt the weight of carrying emotions she never gave herself permission to release. But instead of turning away, she leaned in. She asked the hard questions. Why do I keep choosing this? What am I avoiding? Where did this come from? And as she peeled back the layers, she started finding the real her underneath all the noise. It takes courage to confront your own patterns, to admit when you've self-sabotaged, when you've allowed what should have been cut off. It takes maturity to realize healing isn't pretty. That growth doesn't feel good at first. But she didn't choose comfort, she chose transformation. And now she carries a strength that can't be bought, borrowed, or broken, because it was forged in fire, in solitude, in truth. She doesn't flinch at emotional conversations anymore. She doesn't avoid accountability. She's not scared to hear the truth, even if it stings, because she's already said the truth to herself when no one else was around. That's the woman who walks differently. That's the woman who's not easily impressed, because she knows what real growth costs. She's seen her own mess. She's cleaned up her own heart. And now she has no interest in anything or anyone that pulls her back into what she fought so hard to rise from. People don't always recognize that kind of woman right away, because she's not always the loudest in the room. But there's something in her energy, a calm, a presence, a stillness that says, I've already been through hell, and I didn't break, so what else you got? She's not arrogant. She's anchored. She's not aggressive. She's aware. And that awareness makes her dangerous in the best way, because you can't shake someone who's already met their own darkness and made peace with it. And don't mistake that peace for weakness. She still feels. She still loves. But now, she's more careful with what she gives her heart to. She doesn't hand it over blindly. She doesn't chase validation. She doesn't need saving. She became her own rescue. She rewrote her own story, and now, when she walks into relationships, she's not looking for someone to complete her. She's looking for someone who respects the journey it took for her to complete herself. That's why she's not afraid of solitude. It was never a punishment. It was the place where she found her voice, her vision, her values. And now, no one can take those from her. Because once a woman has faced her own reflection, owned her own healing, and built herself back piece by piece, there is nothing more dangerous than her peace.